Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CKCB Features, the interview show that CKCB does. And with me, if you remember back several episodes ago, we covered the Movement of God cult with cult leader Sam Fife. With me is a guy who I talked about on that particular episode. He's also written a book about his experience in the move. Um, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Richard Kiers. How's it going, man?
Really good. How are you today?
I'm good. Had a long day at work, but wasn't the longest. But
Well,
still,
there you go.
um, so before we get into the interview, just tell people, just tell people a little bit about who you are, what you're doing now, stuff like that, just so people can get to know you a little bit.
Well, basically, I'm a survivor, I would call it, of the Move, which is a group that was founded by Sam Fife in the early 60s. And I'm not so sure that I really call myself a survivor. I mean, life is life for everyone, but we all
I
have
would.
different circumstances. We all have different circumstances in our life, and this was a tough row to hoe as a kid. And I decided that I wanted to tell my story and write a book about my life and maybe help people understand that they're not alone. And there's a lot of people that have gone through this in many different cults. And I just like to try to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to tell their story and realize that they are not alone. So that's why I wrote the book.
It's a good book too. It's a really good read. It as I said in the episode that we covered the cult. The book arrived the day that we were supposed to be recording the episode, so I didn't unfortunately didn't get to use the book as source material. But it's called Swindled by Faith, and people can get it on Amazon or wherever you get your books. You know, Amazon, whatever.
It's on Amazon. It's
But
on Barnes and Noble. It's also on Kindle. You can get it in electronic format as well.
cool. It's a really good story. It really interesting. Um, I particularly liked, I liked the way that you basically questioned everything, and when you finally had enough, you were gone, and nobody was going to tell you, nobody was going to dissuade you.
Yes, I think part of that is because in the move particularly, but it may be the same in some of the other cults as well, is that uh, the way that they keep you is by creating a fear that you're so afraid to move on with your life that you constantly hang on, hang on, hang on. And I made a choice to just accept my fate. And once I did that, I didn't care anymore, so I never went back.
Yeah, the one time that they tried to get you to bring you back in, um, Sam Fife, the cult leader himself, showed up and basically yanked you off the street, drove you back to the commune, and you just you sat there and talked to them for hours in this van, and then when you got back, you're just like, all right, thanks for the ride, see ya, and you just walked away.
It was a very interesting situation. I was actually living in Edmonton with a family that was sort of borderline still involved with the group, but not really. And they were taking care of me. They were wonderful people, and we had I had agreed to go back on that trip just because they wanted me to come with them and they wanted to talk to me. Uh, I didn't really assume at the time that they wanted to take me back to keep me there, but I realized that by the time we got back up there, it was a 7 8 hour road trip. Uh, and by the time we got back up north
Yeah.
where the farms were, I just got out of the vehicle, walked to the bus depot, and got back on the bus and came back to Edmonton. So
Well, I mean, I can imagine. I mean, I can, this is what I kind of took away from that. Okay, they do it, and they pick you up in Edmonton, and they figure like a 7-8 hour drive or whatever, you're basically a captive audience. So they probably figure in that time, that it would take to get back there, they could re-brainwash you, and and not to mention the fact that this is you're with the head cheese, you're with the head honcho, Sam Fife. You've never met him before, so there's probably a little bit of curiosity to just to kind of pick his brain a little bit. Am I right?
I was very curious. I was even really nervous at first, but that went away really quickly. I found out that he was actually quite a normal person. I was surprised how normal he was, considering that we kind of thought that he was a god, and we were basically taught to think of him that way. And he turned out to be a very normal person. We talked about a lot of things other than the move. We talked about flying planes and something that I like to do, and he was a pilot. He
Well,
had
you're
his own
obviously a
private
better
plane.
pilot than he is.
Well, he was obviously not a great pilot because he made a mistake, but those things happen
Yeah,
too. I mean, but yes,
I
that's
know.
true.
But I gotta throw a jab to a cult leader whenever I get an opportunity, and I couldn't pass that one up.
Well, I appreciate that. I understand that. Yeah. Yeah. And especially since he had really made a big deal about the fact that he had achieved eternal life. He was going to live forever and never going to die. And he made sure that everybody knew. I heard him publicly state, and so did thousands of us, that if he did die, he was definitely a false prophet. And so
Well,
it just then I think it was about a year later that he crashed his plane and died. So
probably the only truthful thing he ever said.
yeah, yeah, I think that may be true.
But I mean, he was. Yeah, I can imagine. Like I never got to meet the cult leader, Hobart Freeman, that I was under when I was a kid. I
Right.
never got to meet him. I met several others, that were part of his inner circle. I met several others, but I never met the big guy himself. But and I don't honestly, I don't know what I would have thought if what would I have said to him as a kid, other than like you were saying, it's like, okay, y'all, he made himself out to be a god, and y'all, and all the people that were part of the move believed it. And I mean, Freeman never came out and said that he was a god, although he did say that the only way to God was through him, and Jesus said that.
Yeah, exactly.
So
The thing about Sam was that when he did die, there was always an excuse for everything that didn't happen. Like interestingly enough, he when he said he was going to die and then he died, we were told he was taken by God because he had achieved such a level of perfection on this earth that he couldn't live here anymore. So God had to take him away. And like I think they call that gaslighting. Is that correct?
yeah,
So,
but
and it was not unlike the fact that the world was supposed to end. I can give you at least four exact dates that we were told the world was going to end, and it never happened. And every single time that it happened, it was because God's children weren't quite ready for it yet. So God changed His mind. It's pretty simple.
they all figure out that it's best to not give dates. They all seem to figure that out.
Well, they like to
Like,
give dates because you can live in fear, and everybody's ready to go. Everybody's ready to the end of the world, and then they have to give it because they certainly didn't wait very long to give it a new date. Once the date passed, that didn't happen. They would give it a new date. So they had
yeah,
1975, 1986, 1992, or something like that, and then Y2K. Oh, that was the big one.
I bet. So yeah, so Fife died. Do you know? I mean, you were gone by that time, obviously. Do you know if any details about what happened when Buddy Cobb took over the cult?
I don't know a lot about the move after Buddy Cobb took over. I do know I've spoken to people that were still in it and people that have left since then. Uh, he was a pretty tough nut as well, as far as like very strict with the rules and everything. But it was interesting that the move just kept on going, even without Sam. Uh, it had obviously the doctrine had already actually been set up so well that for another leader to just be able to take over and keep it running was pretty amazing, to be honest with you. But then it did kind of simmer down, because when I left, there was about 44,000 people in the move all across North America, South America, even into Europe. And
Mm,
by the time Buddy Cobb passed away, I think it was down to 4 or 5,000 people. So he didn't manage to keep it alive.
yeah. I mean, people probably, it's just like they do figure out that they've been duped. I mean, I mean, it just takes some people longer than others. But then, like you said in your book, I mean, there's still those communes that were in operation. They're still in operation
Yes, some of
somewhat.
them are, you bet.
They still had people, people still living there, and just just waiting for the big one.
Yeah. What I really find interesting, even to this day, is the hypocrisy of these leaders, because not a single one of them would have ever lived on one of those communes. They all lived
Hmm.
in large cities, in beautiful homes, lived their lives, flew their own private airplanes. It doesn't it cost a lot of money to fly your own private plane, and they didn't seem to have a
Costs a lot of
problem
money to
flying.
live in Miami.
Well, exactly. And so I don't understand why normal people wouldn't see through the hypocrisy, because it's really there. It really is.
Hmm.
You're expected to live in the woods in a little tiny log cabin with wood heat, no outhouse or no toilets, just outhouses, no electricity, and they're living high on the hog. So it made no sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just people when I mean, okay. Um, this just popped into my head. When you have like right now, like right now, you've got people that worship celebrities, worship these high paid athletes and stuff like that and everything. Meanwhile, they live in a trailer park that where there's places where you can see the ground through the floor, and but they've they got no problem. They they worship these people, and it's a cult like phenomenon. It's not cult. I mean, they're not in a cult. I mean, I mean, you're not going to have somebody in a Dallas Cowboys. Well, the Cowboys fans. I'm kidding, Cowboys fans, but but
Yeah, exactly. No, it is. It's like a cult
but
like following. I mean, look at politics. I don't want to get into politics, but if you look at politics, it's very cult like in many ways. There's a leader that people
well,
just
it's the same
absolutely
way.
revere. They worship. They would. I mean, if there's many people in the United States, if they had the opportunity to shake Trump's hand, they would pass out. Simply because it's that feeling of being in touch with this powerful, powerful being that is so much bigger than you are. And it's kind of crazy, but that's kind of human nature.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, you want somebody to look up to, and
Absolutely.
everybody wants someone to look up to, but
Yeah.
it's just it looking up to somebody can turn into something like an unhealthy obsession, and that's where like people that get roped into cults, that's what they wind up with. Unhealthy obsession where that's like completely brainwashed by the cult leader, and they just buy everything. But the thing is you're not, well, I was about to say that you're not going to find a cult leader that's just dull and boring, but that's not true. I mean,
No, that's not true either. That's for
Marshall
sure.
Applewhite, Applewhite of Heaven's Gate. That guy was that guy was boring. Once
Yeah,
his
no,
wife
I've
died.
I've I've spoken to many people from different cults where their leadership was just an absolute absolutely unbelievable, boring and drab and couldn't speak, and yet they had this power, this ability to completely take over the minds and the thought process of people. And when you look at Jonestown, I mean, Jim Jones was actually a pretty flamboyant person, but he had those people
Yeah,
so completely under his spell that the majority of them were willing to kill themselves for him. Heaven's Gate, another one, they did the same thing. Like they committed suicide, all of them, just because they were told to.
yeah.
And we never got to that point with our group. And I don't think that there was. I have a hard time believing that there would be people in the group I was in that were that uh, intoxicated with it. But at the same time, who knows? They may have been. They gave up their.
There's probably a small percentage. There's probably a small percentage that would have if Fife or Cobb had come out and said, you know what, the time is now. God has told me that that in order to avoid the apocalypse, we have to end our existence here on this sinful planet. But then that would actually, you know what, that would deflect from what their mission was
Their
originally,
mission
was
was
that
to live
after the
forever.
apocalypse,
Yep.
after the apocalypse, they would be the rulers of the earth and basically enslave the rest of humanity that wasn't part of the move.
Yeah, exactly. No, there, unfortunately, there are cults that ends up being the end. Like Koresh was another one where they all ended up dead. But at the same time,
Mhm. Well,
that
that's a different set of circumstances,
that was
though.
totally different set of circumstances. That wasn't suicide. It may have been
Yeah,
on his behalf, but not on his followers. But at the same time, I don't know. I think though my goal in all of this is to bring awareness to how kids are treated. And
yeah,
I feel I'm a strong believer that if an adult wants to go into a cult and an adult wants to live on a farm somewhere and have an outhouse and live with the
more power
only
to you.
hand-me-down clothes, that's their choice. Adults
Yeah,
have the choice and we can do that. But children are dragged into this and children are forced
yeah.
because they can't leave. And
You were, I was,
and
and
unfortunately, the rules that are made to be able to keep children in line can be very, very painful and assertive, and even aggressive. And those rules, uh, kids break the rules because that's how kids are. They break rules. That's just any kid in any normal situation in life breaks rules. It's what happens to you after you break those rules. And some of the stories that I'm told are just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, we had some stiff discipline things on our farm, but some of the people that were disciplined in some of the groups they were in, it was just absolute torture, and they were just kids.
yeah,
And
yeah. It's
I think one of the ways to decipher whether something is a cult or not is we always talk about the fact that it's got a hierarchy. You've got a leader, you've got the next step down, which are kind of the group guy, the elders, and then you've got the pawns, the people underneath. But reality is that uh, it's that hierarchy is designed and developed for control. The top guys tell the next guy down what has to happen. The guys under that control the elders on the farms and stuff, how that all happens. They make the rules and then they force everyone else to follow those rules. And they have to keep the kids in line because the kids are the ones that are going to grow into it. And and to keep the thing going, those kids they have to conform. So you have to keep the kids in line. And I say to everybody, don't just look at the hierarchy. Don't just look at that. Look at how the kids are treated. In every cult that I've
hmm
spoken to, every person I've spoken to from a cult, the kids were treated terribly.
hmm
You yourself, you
yeah,
have nightmares from the things that happened to you as a kid, and you never get over that for the rest of your life.
no,
There's no therapy. There's nothing that's going to completely get that out of you. PTSD, it's terrible with these kids.
not complete, not completely. Although it does help. I did not go through therapy. I probably should have, but yeah. Now I just don't have time to. But
Exactly. Yeah. You have a life now.
um, yeah, and I have a you know I have two kids of my own that I would never dream of treating the way that I was treated or the way that you were treated, or and anything. And it's just you this is probably the move. I think I've probably covered 25 or so cults on this podcast in the 2.5 years of its existence, and you would think that you'd think I'd get used to hearing these stories about how kids are treated, but I don't. I don't get used to it. I don't want to get used to it it's just it's just like when I talk about what happened to me, I I'll just talk about it, okay, nonchalantly, like same thing. It's just like, okay, I went to work today. Work was it was a pretty stressful day and all that stuff, and and just because that was what I knew. But when I hear somebody else's story and everything, it still rubs me the wrong way. I mean, it's just like I've been doing a deep dive on that. This is the second episode in a row that I've given this podcast a plug, and that's the cult next door. And yeah, it's just like I've been listening to them. It's a family that's telling their entire story because they were children of the cult leader, and they all basically left. Um, and it's just like there were times during that where I was just like, I was screaming at my speakers, like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just,
But
it's
that's part of what I just said. It's never completely the hurt that you felt is never completely gone, and it just kind of stirs that, it hits that soft spot, it hits that point of pain. And
mhm.
I've listened to people telling me their story, and I've had to actually turn my video off because tears come to my eyes because I listen to them and they tell me their story, and it's almost so many times it's something new, something I've never heard before, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and some of the stories are so devastating. And these people are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they still can't hardly talk about it because it's so painful for them. And that's why I appreciate your podcast, is because these podcasts have, it's technology that has given people an opportunity to just tell their story and get it out there,
Yeah,
because it's healing to tell your story. I have people that I've spoken to that have been out of it for 30 years, 35 years, and have never talked about it. And they're married and they can't talk to their spouse about it because their spouse was not involved in it and just doesn't understand. And they say, oh, I don't want to hear about this stuff. Eventually it gets boring, or
hmm
it's just too much to take in, and they don't want to talk about it. So it's nice for people to have that opportunity to let it out.
yeah. Or you get with somebody who weaponizes the knowledge against you, which has happened to me
Absolutely.
fairly recently.
I have one that
And
I have one that did that.
yeah,
Yes, I know
I only
exactly.
have I only have one, and I will only have one because if that ever happens to me again, I'm see ya.
Yeah, exactly. You learn to understand that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like you're not gonna you yeah, like whenever we would get into an argument, and I would like like slightly take the lead in the argument or whatever,
Right.
like actually starting to prove my point. Oh, I forgot you were raised in a cult. Yeah, fuck you. you know.
Well, and one of the reviews on my Amazon reviews, the comment was made that I have to feel like I have to make myself some kind of hero. And I just want everyone to know that I was not a hero. And I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who wants to tell my story, and who wants to reach out to people that actually want to tell their story, and that maybe I can just be a little bit of help to someone. And
Same.
that's my purpose of doing this. I don't really care if I end up being a hero or not. That doesn't affect me at all.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to quite a few cult survivors. Mainly the cult survivors of the cult that I was raised in, Faith Assembly.
Hmm.
But I've talked to others. I mean, you and Dusty from last week's episode are the first two survivors that I've actually had on the podcast, and that's probably going to change in the future. I'm probably going to do more of that, but yeah, because it's fascinating because you're doing two things when you do that. You're giving people you're giving people that have never told their story before a chance to get it off their chest, but at the same time you're educating people out there who might, if, like, let's say there's this, let's say there's this family, like both parents have lost their jobs and stuff like that, and they're all they're desolate, they don't know what to do, and all of a sudden, some friend of a friend shows up at the door and says, "Hey, come to my church. It'll all be better." And it's podcasts like this that that it's just like people are going to hear that and maybe think, okay, maybe I don't want to do that.
It
you know,
raises the awareness. Absolutely. It
that's what I
also,
meant.
yeah, it also makes people realize that uh, don't just jump into anything headlong. Always check everything before you commit to it. I was on this. I'm on these chats on Facebook, and there's this one person that wrote their little thing on there, and they said, "I left my church yesterday. I feel so good because it was a cult, and here's the reason it was a cult and everything. But I'm in a new church now, and I just joined them, and they're so wonderful, and they're so great, and they're all this kind of stuff." And that tends to be something that people do as well, is you get out of one and you just fall right back into another one because you need that cushion. You
Right.
need that support group around you. And unfortunately, I'm not saying that all churches and all religions are bad. I'm the last person on the planet to say that, because I know that a lot of people do need to have that camaraderie. They need people around them, and they need to feel like they belong to a community. And that's fine. Sometimes a church is a great place to do that. But when a church starts to tell you how you can dress, how you can wear your hair, what you can eat, what you can
Hmm.
drink, who you can see in your life and have as friends, can you drink a beer or can you not drink a beer? Do you have to stay away from your relatives who are not part of that particular religion because they're infidels? You take and look at all of those factors, and now you've got a problem if any of those exist. And I know of I went to a church in Victoria a couple of times, and they called themselves a free church, free of whatever. And the reality of it was that they didn't care if you showed up on Sunday or if you didn't show up on Sunday. You just came, you had a group of people, you had fun together, talked, listened to a little bit of preaching, and you left. And that I don't believe that that was a cult. And it actually had quite a few people there because people
Yeah.
didn't feel any pressure. But and it's good to have community. So I'm not telling people don't go to church. But what I'm telling people is decipher what you are involved in. Look at it. Make sure that you are not being sucked into something that controls you, your life, and the people around you. That's really important.
Right.
And
It is.
we talk always in America, we talk even in Canada, the United States, we always talk about freedom, freedom, freedom. And we're so willing to fight to keep our freedom when it comes to politics. And then we go to church in these silly religions and these groups that are have total, complete, absolute control of our lives, every aspect of our lives, and we don't even question it. Like, there's a problem with that.
Can you expand a little bit on, like, what was said when your dad came home from that what did they call it, convention? They called it
They
convention,
call it a
right?
convention. Yes, it's a group. It's a
Okay.
gathering. They had several of them every year.
Faith Assembly, whenever that happened, they called it seminar. So it's the same thing. It, it's the exact same thing. But but he went to this. Your dad went to this one in South Carolina, and when he came back, it's just like, all right, guys, guess what? Everything that you know is about to change. We're going to be rulers of the. We're going to be masters of the new
Masters
earth
of the
under God
universe. Well, I'll tell
by the
you.
power of Grayskull.
That's exactly what went through my mind. I when Dad, I was 10 years old when that happened, so I was still quite young. But the reality was that I remember Dad coming home and telling us that we were no longer going to be going to our church. And I'm not too sure if people are really familiar with the Christian Reformed Church, but in the Christian Reformed Church, it's a very strict doctrine where you have, church in the morning, church in the afternoon on Sunday. You have certain protocols that you have to live with every day. When you get up for breakfast in the morning, you have to read this paperwork from them and then pray before and after every meal. And you're indoctrinated completely. It's a very strict religion. And so that was our life. That was our cornerstone of our life, was our church. And our church also had its own
Would you
school.
say that was cultish, or was it also a cult,
You know what? I'd say
or was it
cultish.
or was
I
cultish?
wouldn't
Okay.
say I wouldn't say that was a cult. I think that was just a church that was very strict on their doctrine. They didn't tell you that you couldn't have friends that were outside of the church, other than Catholics. We weren't supposed to be friends with Catholics, and I'm not really sure why that was because I don't remember. But Catholics were bad, 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 and but at the same time,
Well, Catholicism is heresy according to non-denominational cults.
oh,
You know, Cat.
I tend to agree with that. I've studied Catholicism a lot, and I have lots of questions about that one, but that's for another
Yeah, but
episode, my friend.
that's why. That's why
Yeah, yeah,
it's the biggest boogeyman. Okay. Well, we're talking. We're talking about years back in the '70s, mine in the '80s. Um, the Mormons and Scientology hadn't appeared on the grand scale, the grand stage yet. So the biggest dog out there was and still is Catholicism.
yes, yeah,
so
yeah,
um so that's
yeah.
why you know I mean
So
they were the boogeyman. They were the boogeyman that these cult leaders like put in front of you, so that therefore um okay, it's the biggest organized religion in the world.
absolutely,
And
yeah,
so of course it's easy, you know and it's also easy to because of the fact that it's the biggest organized religion in the world. It's also going to have the most people, so you can alienate your people off of a good, probably 1 in 5 people that you meet are Catholics, so it's really easy to isolate you from them.
exactly. But you were saying like about when my dad came back. Um, we were just pulled from our church immediately, but we were not pulled from our school immediately because we didn't have an alternative school to go to. So we ended up staying, I think it was at least another month or two in the school that we were in, which was the school of the church that we had been in. And those months were very difficult because we were picked on, we were treated terribly. Not, and I don't think that the kids did it on purpose. Kids are kids, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
kids are just
we
assholes.
we were strange. We were the strange ones. We were the weird ones. We'd gone off the deep ends. We were called holy rollers. We were treated terribly. I've met with and spoken to many of the young people that I went to school with, who now look at us from a totally different perspective because they see what actually happened in our lives and how our lives were messed up. And they understand that. And they've grown up and become adults. And many of them I'm still in touch with today. People that I went to school with at the age of 10 and younger that I've reconnected with. Thank God for Facebook. The Facebook is, it's one good thing that Facebook is. You can connect with people from the past. But
Right.
then we ended up building our own school in a garage on a small acreage just outside of the community we lived in. And we went to that school for a year or so before we decided, a year and a little bit before mom and dad decided that, or Sam Fife decided that everybody had to move up to northern British Columbia. And we bought a farm up there and moved up to BC. That was in 1972.
Now, that's one thing that's different about Sam Fife from these other cult leaders that have communes. Usually, they want everybody all together. That's one thing that kind of struck me as odd. That's one thing that I hadn't heard of. You know, yeah, it's just like, okay, get as far away from me as you possibly can.
Well,
But if you think about it, it's like it's just like you know these cult leaders, they don't care about their followers. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Get as
Well,
far away from me as you can.
that's kind of, and we didn't see a lot of Sam Fife. Like Sam Fife was just not a regular fixture in the group. Like you'd hear tape recordings of his sermons, and you'd hear even in a convention. We went to a convention in Canton, Ohio. I understood that there was about 10,000 people at that convention. It was big. I was a kid, so it seemed really big to me. I may be imagining that it was that many people, but I think it was around that many people. And I think we were there for like 3 or 4 days of sermons and preaching. And it wasn't until the last day that Sam Fife got up there and preached. He preached for about 4.5 hours, but he made
Hmm.
up for it in that one day. But at the same time, there was a lot of other people that they called ministry that preached for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. I mean, I think in a convention, if I think we're probably in church for 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day during that time, just listening to indoctrination. But not a
Hmm.
lot of Sam Fife.
Hmm. That's another thing that's different because I mean, yeah, the cult, but the cult leader wants to put themselves up on a up on a pedestal. Everybody look at me. Sam Fife didn't want anybody, but
I
Mark
think he
Freeman was
did.
the same way.
I think he did. It was very strategic because everybody was just looking forward to him getting up there, and everybody was so excited about the fact that he was going to preach, and we kind of knew he was coming on the last day, and it was he came out when they would when the singing, like they would have hours and hours of everybody singing these homemade songs, and he would get up on stage with his guitar because he loved his guitar and he'd sing quite a bit, and they called it leading the singing. I'm sure you've heard of that before, and
Hmm.
he even would actually make up songs and then teach everybody the songs, and then everybody would sing those songs over and over and over and over again, and they didn't even really make a lot of sense, but he was into that. So
So he was good at writing lyric structure, not necessarily good lyrics.
exactly. And even some of the music, like when I think about it, the actual music itself, some of it was actually pretty good, but the lyrics just
Yeah.
sucked. If you think of it now, and
Well,
like
if he was a country music performer from back then, yeah, he was probably pretty good because country music back then was actually some pretty very impressive musicianship.
yeah, he actually was a country music performer, and he actually wrote music
Oh no,
before he got into this. Yes, he was a
yeah,
Baptist. He was actually a
we kind of
Baptist preacher. He was an ordained Baptist preacher, and then he was asked to leave the Baptist church because he became too radical, and he had just started
for
there.
playing
So he,
country music.
it wasn't so much that it was a it was his preachings and his beliefs that were
Oh,
not in line with the Baptist church, so they didn't let him be in there anymore. So, but
it's kind of like if Kenneth Copeland thinks that you're too radical, then you're probably too radical. And um, yeah, that was the thing about the cult leader that I was raised under. Kenneth Copeland actually blasted him about being too radical.
oh,
Whoa.
that's actually a compliment. Oh well, that's funny.
coming from, I don't believe in the reptilian conspiracy, but I do believe that there is one on the planet, and it's Kenneth Copeland.
Oh yes, yeah.
I got a question for you. After you left, after you left, after you moved from the move, did you try to go back to church, or were you just done?
I was done. I mean, I've been back and forth to church a few times. My first wife, uh, she was Anglican, and we kind of got involved a little bit with the Anglican church in the community we were in for a little while. But it never became a part of our life. It was just one every so often you go to church.
Mm.
So
Well, when you would go to these churches, were you like on guard? Were you like on, you know? head on a swivel, just looking, just
I was very
I
critical. I would listen very carefully to what was being preached, and I could tear it apart into a million pieces because I just, yeah. So I was skeptical and critical. Yes.
yeah. Just last Sunday, I went to church for the first time in years, and yeah, my anxiety was through the roof.
Really?
I mean, yeah, and it was just like I'm just yeah. So that's why I was asking you about that because
Yeah.
I was wondering if this like you had similar reaction. I'm going to try to go back and see if I can see if I can see if that'll go away. If it doesn't go away, then I don't need to be there. If it does go away, then maybe I do need to be there. But this
I
is
think it would go away. I think it would go away eventually. I don't, I didn't, I never witnessed that because I really honestly, I'm at that point in my life. I really honestly got to a point in my life where I'm not anti-God, but I'm anti-religion, and I'm so anti-religion that I walk into a place like that and I just see right through it. And it's just, I almost laugh. It's funny.
yeah yeah. I just I don't know. It's just yeah. It seems like a good way to meet people and
It
everything,
is.
so long as it's not a cult. And
It's actually,
um,
in many cases, it's a great community. I tell
yeah,
people
my
that a lot of times. I have friends that say to me, "Should I be going to church? Is it, is my church a cult? Is it that?" And I said, "You do what you have to do to make your life better. And if your friends are there and your community is there, and you can go to a church bazaar or to a big potluck dinner with your church friends and have fun, that's not a bad thing. That doesn't hurt
yeah
anybody." And
yeah
usually, the majority of
my
people,
daughter's asked me. And my daughter had been asking me like sporadically over the past like few years to take her to a church. So I was just like, "Okay, all right, uh, we'll we'll make that happen." but
right?
but yeah, it's just my anxiety was through the roof. I couldn't wait to get out of there. It just I felt I yeah I'm I sat near the water fountain and I had a bottle a bottled water. I must have in the hour that I was there, I must have filled that thing up four times.
Wow.
And
Yeah, I think
I
the
mean
last
I
time I was in church was my wife's son and his wife had had a child, and they baptized this child in this church, and they dedicated the child, and they asked me to come to the dedication, and I went. Um, it just really, we sat sort of close to the back, and we went through it and walked out, and that was the end. It was just it was not a negative or positive experience for me. It was just one of those things.
just one of those things, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's just because I didn't know. And it's just like I mean, this is the first time that I've been to a church since I started the podcast and really started to like invest, like digging into cults and stuff like that. Yeah, I'd been to churches before, and yeah, my anxiety was up, but it wasn't like it was last Sunday. Last Sunday, it was. I don't think I've ever felt anxiety like that before. We've been talking about how widespread, the the sexual abuse that was just basically looked away, and that's a common occurrence in like lots of these cults and everything. Yeah, they make the the victim out to be just like, oh well, she wanted it, well, stuff like that. I mean, just uh, you've talked to a lot of survivors of that cult. How many times have you heard that come up?
uh, as far as abuse is concerned, probably I would say at least uh, 25, probably 25 to 30% of the people I talked to were sexually abused. And then quite a few of them were just physically and emotionally abused. And, and then the psychological abuse. So there's several different types of abuse that I'm hearing about on a regular basis. The sexual abuse, ironically, is just as common with boys as it is with girls.
Oh yeah.
Like there's just as many men that are coming out and saying, "Hey, this happened to me," as there is women that are saying it happened to them.
That
I was really quite surprised about that. Uh,
that didn't happen. That didn't happen where I was that I know of, but I know that it did happen in other satellite locations, throughout the
yeah,
world. So,
and the problem with it when it happened was it was just brushed under the carpet. Like
mhm.
we had an incident on our farm, for example, where an elder who was married with kids was having a relationship with a 17-year-old girl, and all they did was just took him and his family and his wife and kids and moved them to another farm, just shuffled them around, right? And yeah, she was 17. I'm sure she was quite, agreeable to what was going on. It wasn't like she was being raped, but at the same token, it was not an appropriate scenario or appropriate situation. And but those things were never talked about. Those things were just shuffled under the rug, and they'd move people around from one farm to another and make it go away instead of deal with it.
Damn. So, um, when when the whole thing, like after Sam Fife died, um, Buddy Cobb's daughter-in-law basically divorced Buddy Cobb's son and defected. And um, there was, it's like I talked about this in the episode that I did about the move. And I, I'm not, I'm not sure what I think about her. Um, because
Well,
in the documentary, she was just like, I want to hear the stories. Well, the stories are there. It kind of seemed to me like, okay, well, she knew. I don't think she's as squeaky clean as she claims to be. That
well,
what do you think of that?
yeah, I'm not going to be the judge of anybody, but I have listened to her. I've listened to a lot of the interviews or some interviews that have been done with her. There's not been a lot. There's a few. Um, I do agree that there are people that are on the fence and kind of try to be defensive of the move still, even though they're not in it. And it's almost a I don't believe it, but I'll listen to it kind of attitude.
Yeah,
And there's a difference. I mean, but at the same token, everyone's experience is different. And her experiences, I think, that because of the fact that she was involved, she was a part of that one of the elite family. I
right.
don't think she would have faced some of the stuff that some of the other kids faced. And so I think that I even have family members to this day that tell me that everything I've said is a lie. None of it is true because
Mm.
they didn't experience any of it. So that's just reality. I mean, there's people that didn't experience it.
Wait a
And
minute.
so
People in your family that were part of the move or were not part of the move.
that were all of my brothers and sisters and stuff they were all in the move. We were all in the move, all of us.
They
And
were
we're all
there.
and we're all out of it now. Yes, but they don't believe the stuff that they hear that they say because they never experienced it firsthand, so they don't know. They know about the physical abuse and they know about the psychological abuse, but when it comes to the sexual abuse stuff, it's deny, 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 deny because they weren't involved. It wasn't part of, and so it's easier to say you're lying than it is to say let's deal with it.
It happened. It happened to your sister. I
Uh,
mean,
Absolutely, and there's no denying of that. I mean, that was a really bad situation, and there were circumstances that I mean, People Magazine did the interview, and they kind of took some liberties with how they told the story because it wasn't
I
exactly the
know, and
way.
I caught that after the first time you and I talked. I picked up on that.
Yeah, but of course, then when people saw the People Magazine thing, they said that that's the way I told the story, which really wasn't the way. But they took liberties, which made it a little more easy to sell. Maybe I don't know, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The reality of it is that it doesn't change the fact that it happened.
Right.
And it did happen, and people can say whatever they want, but the fact that it happened is one of the abuses. The second abuse is the fact that the guys were able to walk away and get away with it and not have to face the consequences of what they did. And it was brushed
Right.
under the rug, like everything else, constantly brushed under the rug and made to be a secret, make it go away. And so when I wrote about it in my book, of course, people got angry because I took something that was supposed to go away and I brought it back to the front.
And you brought it back to the forefront. Yeah.
Exactly. And those types of things, uh, people can be as angry at me as they want to be for telling the story, but I'm hoping that there's many more people that hear the story and pay attention so that it doesn't happen to anybody else.
Exactly. That's why we do what we do. I mean, yeah, that right there is why we do what we do, to bring awareness to this, to people. Yeah, just I would really like to, just like people throw, like right now, people throw the word cult around, like the same way they throw narcissist around with somebody that they don't, they disagree with.
Yes,
And it's just like,
exactly.
okay, well, if you follow this politician or that politician, you're in a cult. Um, these people have no clue what it's like to be in a cult.
They have
Um,
no idea. Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, so and and that's why podcasts like this one, like the one that you're going to start, all the other cult podcasts that are popping up, like the cult next door, was I in a cult, all these podcasts are so very important, because it's just like, a lot of times these these cult leaders can get away with it. I mean, like I said on the podcast, that the episode that we did when we covered the move, um nobody spent nobody did any time, other than the guy that ran that TTI camp, and he was cleared of his charges.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how that ever happened. I do know that they must have thrown a lot of money at that because they got him off. And I don't really know how they managed to do that.
I mean, it was that one woman that that was that was basically, she was dragged there. She was an adult and she was dragged there against her will. That's kidnapping.
Well,
you know
exactly. And pouring, when when someone's caught smoking a cigarette and they put them in a bathtub, fill it with cold water, and then pour ice into it and make them sit in there for 20 minutes as punishment, like that's cruel punishment.
Yeah,
And
that's assault.
that's assault. And those types of things were done. I've heard that story a couple of times from different people that were in different cults that it happened to. So it's not like it was just isolated to one experience. There's a couple of them that I know of. Um,
Right.
there was, the abuse that took place was real and it was crazy. And our cult was more into just the spanking and the spirit, spare the rod, spoil the child. There was lots of spanking and hitting and that type of thing. Uh, that was just the norm. It was all the time. It happened all the time. That's how you were punished. And it
Yeah.
sometimes very, very seriously physical hitting too. And nowadays you'd go to jail for that. Nowadays your kids would be taken away from you for that.
Yep.
But we're not
No,
allowed
we.
to talk about it.
Yes, we are, and we shall.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
But when, it's just, when I watched that, because I've kind of taken up the, you and I talked about this, but I've kind of hitched my like lent my voice to the survivors of the troubled teen industry as well. So I know an awful lot about that. I've had I've had one TTI member on, like, several different times, to talk about it and everything. And when I watched that documentary, when I was doing the research for the Movement of God episode, it's just that it's a TTI camp. It's nothing more, nothing less. It's a freaking TTI camp. And and it's just like the stuff that was going on there is no different than these places that are out in Utah, the Teen Challenge camp, wherever they are. Um, there's one in my hometown of Merritt Island. There's one here where I live now that was in Lakeland, Florida, which was like recently shut down a couple years ago because a girl died.
Yeah.
And this is it the same thing, and it's just I'm like I didn't know anything about the move when I started looking into it. I just wanted to, I'm just like, okay, I tend to go after the cults that I haven't heard of.
Yeah.
So it's why it's going to be a while before I cover Jonestown or
Right.
even
Yeah.
or even Waco.
Well,
It just goes
everyone's covered those. Everyone's covered those.
right.
So, yeah.
But
But you're absolutely right about the fact that these people, uh, these camps do exist, and they exist. They didn't exist just in the move. They exist in so many different cults. And in fact, I was just doing some research, and apparently there's like almost 10,000 active cults in the United States at this time. And my question is to the government: why is government doing nothing to shut these places down? Why are they not saying, "Hey, you can't treat kids like that"? We talk about letting our kids make transgender choices at the age of 7 when they're, but we don't protect our kids from
but you don't
abuse.
right exactly, and it's like yeah I'm not gonna don't light us up in the comments. We're not talking about the transgender thing,
No, 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 no. I
but
didn't. But what I'm saying is that
no,
we take
I
one
know
thing to an
I know what you
extreme.
meant. I know what
Yeah.
you meant. It's just like okay, you've got the you've got the government, like it's like, oh, okay, it's okay for a child to make decisions about their gender and all that stuff. Well, what about if that's okay, fine, whatever. That's not what this podcast is about. But but what about the people that the kids that get kidnapped in the middle of the freaking night, which happened to people in the move, like
Yes.
Priscilla from that thing,
Yeah.
and just dragged to these abuse camps, basically concentration camps, and you know, it's money.
And they were
It's totally.
forced to conform, and
Mhm.
that's just the way it was. And our farm wasn't like that in terms of dragging people there and forcing them to conform, but we lived out in the middle of nowhere. There was no access to be able to really get out, and you had this doctrine shoved down your face every day, every morning, every night, constantly. Church, 2, 3, 4 times a week, Bible studies, prayer meetings, everything. Just, it was just constant. If you weren't working and eating, or sleeping, you were in church.
Yeah, and um, yeah, and you had to build the facility and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
it's just like and it's just
Yeah, when we arrived, there was absolutely nothing there, just weeds. I mean, it was trees and weeds, that's all.
it's
And we had
crazy.
to literally physically build the road by hand to get in, and then build cabins and live in those little tiny little cabins, surviving, minus 30, minus 40-degree weather, uh, wood stoves, no food, very little food. Like they tried to limit the food that we ate to, or that we purchased, to sugar and salt, and be self-sufficient on everything else. And yeah, they bought a few things here and there, but nothing. I mean,
Sugar
can
and
you
salt.
imagine?
Sugar. I'll you continue, but I want to say sugar and salt. Okay, you both are things that can contribute to high blood pressure.
Yes, that's true. But then,
And if that's all you're getting, Jesus Christ.
well, I mean, you'd have vegetables, and lots of vegetables. We grew our own potatoes and our own uh, what do you call those? turnips, lots of turnips, lots of carrots, potatoes, turnips, that type of thing. They didn't freeze because up there you can't grow anything like corn, or because it freezes.
Right.
There's hardly a month goes by up there that it doesn't freeze at least once in the month. And yeah, so but can you imagine if you ever have a chance to have a scoop of peanut butter and jam on your bread after you lived like that? Like you go, it's like you're in Disneyland. It's just crazy.
Wow. I mean, commune life is something that I did not experience, but it just, and like you're literally the first person that, well, second person. Well, no, you were the first. um, the girl from, you know, his Christian Fellowship, she was the second, but that wasn't really a commune. That was just one place where everybody lived. It was a small cult.
Yeah, yeah,
That's on the episode that came out prior to this one. But it's just, you know, I mean, I'm never, I, I'm never going to stop being like horrified by these stories, and I think that's a good thing. Even though I lived through my own horror, I'm never going to stop being horrified by this, and I think that's a good thing because it's just like, even though I lived it, even though when I'm talking about what happened to me, I could talk about it like, yeah, all right, washed the car this morning, changed the oil, um, was raised in a cult. I could talk about it like that. But when I hear about what happened to other people, it's just it's horrifying because that didn't happen to me.
yeah,
I might be able to relate to some of it because I might have experienced some of it, in a a more of a degree or a lesser degree, but but still, it's
yeah.
just it's all and it's just like that keeps me human,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know.
So in the process of interviewing people, I've run into people that are very complacent. I've run into people that just don't care anymore. But I've also run into people that are still so full of anger and so they just want revenge so bad, and it's just crazy. And then you run into some that are still so hurt that it's just they just can barely make it through the day because they hurt so much. And it's been years and years and years and years since they're out of it. So it affects every single person differently. It really does.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I've said this, I don't know how many times I've said this in interviews too, is everyone's experience was different. And you can't judge someone else's experience based on your own because
Mm-mm.
your experiences were different.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's like I said, you and Dusty are the first two actual cult survivors that I've had on the show. I've talked to quite a few. Like I've talked to probably about 100, but 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 as far as having them on the show and everything, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different than just talking to people, rather than as opposed to what we're doing now and what I did with Dusty last week. Um, she, it just it's a whole different story when you're hearing it from the person that it happened to, and and talking about it as far as like like an interview format, because it's just like I'm trying to what it's like if I'm just talking to somebody just to kind of help them or whatever, that's different. This one I'm trying to get, like if I'm doing an interview, I'm trying to get the meat of the story. I'm trying to get something that's like really going to resonate with people because people are going to hear this, and and it's just, and I'm rambling, but you know what I mean. It's just
I know exactly what you mean. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I would like to hear more about your situation and your circumstances as well. I'm
well, we
working
will.
on I'm working on this second book of mine that will be released fairly soon. It's going to be a lot. It's a lot longer. It's a lot thicker. but it's more in depth on cults as opposed to on my life. It doesn't talk about my life at all, actually. I just basically talk about other people's stories and other people's lives and the cults that they were in. And
Well,
I also dedicated, in the last week, I've been writing like crazy. I don't know why I've been motivated, but I dedicated an entire chapter to just understanding the mind of the cult leaders. And what I did was I took all these different leaders, there's about 35 of them that I researched, and looked at all of the similarities that they have that brought them to the point where they became what they became, and how they made that work for them. And the similarities are unbelievable. They're almost all exactly the same.
oh yeah, they plagiarize each other.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Photocopies of each other, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the cult leader that I was under was basically a carbon copy of a man named William Branham,
I know
and
I've spoken to people from the Branhamites.
yeah, and Hobart Freeman was just a clone of him, although maybe a little bit more crazy, but but um, yeah, I'm learning more about Branham here lately because there's this podcast, the William Branham Historical Research Center, I think is what it's called. I'll link it. I'll link it in this because we talked about it. But I've actually done, they started talking about Faith Assembly on that
Yeah.
as well, and I was a guest on that podcast. Um, but so I'm learning I'm learning a lot. Um, but I just didn't you tell me that Branham was involved with Fife in some way, shape, or form? I
No,
don't even know.
not no, not that I know of.
Somebody told me
They
that.
were quite different. They were quite different from us, other than the fact that the girls had to wear specific clothes, and skirts had to be a certain length and all that. Their hair had to be done a certain way, and that was quite familiar.
Yeah,
I think in our group, actually, the girls could wear their hair pretty much how they wished, but they had to wear their skirts definitely a certain way, and they were never allowed to wear pants, and it was quite strict.
yeah. So I mean, I don't. I mean, do you have anything that you want to wrap up with? I mean, I don't. I mean, it's just like okay, I've got
We could
yeah
go for
the
hours.
I know we can, but
Yeah, it's time. It's time. Um,
yeah, but I mean, we covered we covered the meat of the cult in the previous episode. I'm a little embarrassed I don't have the episode number, but it's a fairly recent one. I think it's but we covered the meat of that, and then there's your book and all that stuff. And I want people to buy your book.
do you have a
Um,
copy of it in front of you there? Still?
hold on,
There
right here.
you go. There you go. Yes.
Swindle by Faith: A Time for Reconciliation, by Richard A. Kiers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and the next one is actually called Silent Voices, which is a book based on the fact that that went through this are being given an opportunity to tell their stories, and there are so many people that have been told, you can't tell anyone about it, don't talk about it, and then when they try to talk about it, they're ridiculed and criticized, and people excommunicate themselves from their families and everything just because they're telling their story. And I want people to have the opportunity to be able to tell their story without judgment, without criticism. That's very
Yep.
important. And uh, it's also difficult sometimes to be 100% accurate when you tell your story 30 years later.
Oh
But
yeah. I mean,
but the
not everybody has a crystal clear memory. I mean, I have a pretty much like photographic memory,
yeah
but here recently I was on this Facebook page for like you know us kids who grew up and who were raised in that and everything. There was something that happened, And I remember what happened in these special services, but I didn't remember what they were called. I had forgotten that they even had a name. And
Right.
then somebody mentions it. Oh, that was the love feast. I'm like, oh crap, that's what that was called. Yeah, okay. But so it's just like even people with photographic memories are still gonna miss some things. 30 years later.
Well, I have people in that I interviewed from the move that will mention the name of somebody who was quite important in the move at that time, and I remember the name instantly, and I can picture them and know them, but I had totally forgotten about that person, and that happens to me sometimes. So, but yeah, it's hard to remember dates, details, those types of things to be exact 100%. But
Right.
this isn't about judging people and finding things to criticize people about. It's listening to their story. It's listening to what happened to them, allowing them to have
Well,
a way to tell that story. And I think
I
that's
tell
really
you what.
important.
I tell you what. I would rather listen to like like a series of podcasts about like people's personal experiences than I would to see a freaking remake of a movie that was been remade over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just the truth. And yeah, just cults. People are bored to death with serial killers because like every true crime podcast out there covers the same ones. Yeah, and it's
Well,
just like
and
what?
the same with covering cults. They all cover
Not
the same
really.
ones.
Not well.
They're starting to expand now, but there was a time it was always the same ones.
Jonestown, Waco,
Yeah.
um, the Anthill Kids,
Scientology, those type of things. Yeah.
Scientology,
But
Nexium.
it's time to like the people need to realize that there's so many of these. It's just crazy, and the governments do very little, if anything, at all to try to protect people and children, particularly from this type of abuse, and that bothers me a lot. I would like to
Mhm.
see. Someone mentioned to me the other day about how Netflix is picking up on things. I'd love somebody like Netflix or someone to pick up on something like this and actually do a movie and
Well, they
and
would
and
have to.
make it.
I mean, it would have to. They would have to like. They've already got the model in place because they did that series on Dahmer, which was really good, and
Yeah,
everybody knows who Dahmer is.
yeah,
But now there's the next one that they're doing like that is the Menendez brothers,
yeah.
and
But they
that
need to
one's
be
really
more general,
controversial.
not specific. They need to be more general. They need to talk about cults in general. How big is it? Where is it all over the place? Like it's and the crossovers, where they cross over each other and how they interconnect with each other, and they teach the same doctrines. And very, like you were mentioning, the one you were in is so much the same as the one I was in. They could have practically been the same thing.
Pretty much.
So, like,
We,
eh,
I mean, it was pretty. We would have been that if we were on a commune.
yes,
It would
exactly,
have it would
exactly,
have been the exact same thing, like cookie
exactly.
cutter. And but I'm not gonna.
No, we'll do
That's
that
just
another time. We'll do
yeah.
that another time. So.
So, all right. Well, yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Um, yeah, and I'm really glad that you reached out to me because I said on the episode, I'm like, I'll find him, I'll get him, and then you reached out to me. It's like I was like, oh, cool. I didn't have to do anything. but
Well,
no,
it shows you that your podcast is actually getting seen and being out there because I just happened upon it.
yeah, and that's what Dusty from last week's episode told me too. She's like about like ever since the book that was written about that cult was released, she was like every few months or so she would just check to see if there was somebody, and yeah, she checked like a month or so ago, and mine popped up, and she made it was on the YouTube page, and she commented on it, and we start talking, and funny thing is, I said some really nasty things about her parents in that first episode.
Oh no.
But she's like, it was justified though. I'm like, okay. Cool.
Here's the thing. This I wanted to just touch on that before we say goodbye here. Uh, when we were talking with your co-host the last time I was talking, there was this, the idea people automatically think that our parents were terrible people. And that is
Mm.
just not the case. Our parents,
It
like my
isn't.
parents, they honestly believed that everything they were doing was absolutely 100% correct and the way God wanted them to do it. They were literally doing everything to the best of their ability. And in doing that, they neglected to do what was right.
Yeah, and it's the exact same thing with my mom.
Yeah.
Um, in your situation, it was your dad. In my situation, it was my mom. But it's just like, and I'm not, and and I'm just going to put this out there for anybody that is thinking about telling their story. I mean, you're probably going to have family members that get pissed off at you for coming onto a podcast and telling it. It's going to happen because they think that you're bad mouthing, your family members that you were in. You're not. I've never said a bad thing about my mom. Everything that I've said in episodes 10 and 11 happened. And my mom and I reconciled.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very vocal about that. And and it's not, you know, it, I'm also talking to people who might maybe have a family member that is coming out to talk about it or whatever. They're not attacking you. They're telling their story because it's been bothering them for years and they want to get it off of their chest. They want to feel better about it. They want to move on from it. It's called closure. People talk about like a, just like if a woman gets raped, she's encouraged to come forward and tell her story and all that stuff. But and nobody's got a problem with that. But meanwhile, you've got a kid that was raised in a freaking abusive, destructive cult, and they want to tell their story about it. And then all of a sudden, family members are just like, "Oh, you need to just let that go." Are you gonna say that to a rape victim? No, you're not. So don't say it to don't say it to cult survivors because
Exactly.
it's not it's not the same thing. And I'm sorry, I'm getting worked up about this because it pisses me off.
But it is the way it is. I mean, my family I was never close to my family to begin with. Some of them I was. But since the book has come out, I haven't spoken to a single one of them. They won't talk to me. I've had a couple of them that have commented on the book. One that specifically said something very specific to me and I said, "Well, where did I say that? Where is it in the book?" And I realized at that moment that that person
She
never
hadn't read
even
the book.
never even read the book because it wasn't in the book.
Yeah, it
And
wasn't. In fact, you what okay, people, what he's talking about is a family member, mentioned that Richard had witnessed an exorcism, and then Richard said, "Okay, well, tell me where in the book that I said that," and she couldn't say that, but in the book he specifically says that he never actually witnessed one.
Yeah, exactly. If you read the book, you find well, and tell me something honestly. Like when you read my book, and I've had people tell me the same thing. When you read my book, I am not attacking my parents, and I'm not
No, not at
attacking,
all.
not at all. In fact, I try my best to show my parents as generally they were good people. They were just
Hmm.
they were just indoctrinated. They were just brainwashed. And,
Yeah.
yeah, we had a lot of things in our family that were normal family stuff, but there was a lot of stuff that happened to us that would have never happened to someone if we wouldn't have been in a cult.
Right,
So,
exactly.
and yes, it was my parents' choice to take us there. But my dad, for example, my dad, I guarantee you that he absolutely was convinced that everything he did was exactly what God wanted him to do, and it was going to grant him and guarantee him a one-way ticket to heaven.
Yeah.
And
I
you
mean,
know,
it's the truth. I
Yeah,
mean, it's you're not talking bad about what happened. You're telling what happened.
exactly, exactly. I will stay in touch with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and it's always great chatting with you. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Give me a second. I'm going to wrap it up. Give me like 30 seconds after that.
Y-
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Um, all right. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Thank you, Richard, for coming on. Um, yeah, appreciate the hell out of it. It's this is a new chapter where in CKCB where I'm actually talking with cult survivors, and it's been enlightening. This episode and the episode that preceded it, it's been very enlightening, and just check it out. Pick up Richard's book, Swindled by Faith. It's a great read. Get it on Amazon. I'll link it and everything. And once again, thank you, Richard, for coming on.
Thank you.
And until next week, later.